All right, so check this out. The Fed's Payment Innovation Conference is going down right now. And honestly, the stuff coming out of this thing is wild. I'm looking at all these updates, and it's becoming crystal clear that the Federal Reserve is actually serious about blockchain tokenization and DLT. And guess who's sitting right in the middle of all this? Ripple and XRP. Look, I know we've heard a lot of noise over the years, but I'm about to break down some brand new info that's got me convinced. Ripple and XRP aren't going anywhere. In fact, they're positioning themselves to absolutely own this space. So Watcher Guru just dropped this report, and just in, Federal Reserve looks into payment accounts that would grant crypto and fintech companies access to Fed payment rails. So Ripple's about to get a national banking license. Do you understand how big that is? That's basically a direct line straight into the Federal Reserve. And guess what they're using to make it all work? XRP. All right, I've got a clip here you absolutely have to watch. Let's roll it.
Good morning. All right. Well, thank you, Susan, and good morning to everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Federal Reserve Board for our first Payments Innovation Conference. My objective in creating this conference is twofold. First, I wanted to have a conference that focused on the new technologies that have come from the DeFi and crypto worlds and how they are entering into the mainstream payments ecosystem. My goal is to have a vibrant discussion about payments between traditional payment incumbents and the new entrants from the DeFi world. Second, I wanted to send a message that this is a new era for the Federal Reserve in payments. The DeFi industry is not viewed with suspicion or scorn. Rather, today, you are welcome to the conversation on the future of payments in the United States and on our home field, something that would have been unimaginable a few years ago. My view for the Fed from now on is embrace the disruption, don't avoid it. As you know, we are well into a technology-driven revolution in payments, and I'm here to say that the Federal Reserve intends to be an active part of that revolution. A number of technological advances are transforming the payment system. Stablecoins and tokenized assets, making use of distributed ledger technology, the rapid adoption of artificial intelligence AI, and increasingly the convergence between these innovations and the traditional financial ecosystem. This includes the institutions and infrastructure that our economy has long depended on to operate a safe and efficient payment system. And yes, this also includes the Federal Reserve. The revolution in transforming payments is demanding change everywhere. And I will say more in a moment about some new ideas that the Federal Reserve is studying to support those innovations. I have spoken before of what I see as the two broad models of payments innovation in our market economy. The first is private sector-driven innovation. Most innovation comes from the private sector, which is motivated and best positioned to allocate resources and take risk with new technologies. The second model is when public sector entities, such as the Fed, build platforms and provide services that enable the private sector to more readily and rapidly expand new services to its customers. This should be done rarely and in limited circumstances where it addresses.
Look, here's the thing. The government is terrible at building tech from scratch, right? So what do? They turn to the private sector. They go to companies like Ripple, like Circle, and they say, hey, we need your technology. They adopt it, they roll it out. This is exactly why I think Ripple could build a custom version of their system and hand it over to the US government, to the Fed, and boom, that becomes America's new payment infrastructure. Now here's where it gets interesting. Everyone connects into the XRP ledger. You can have private ledgers, public ledgers, whatever you need, total flexibility. But think about this for a second. If you're looking for a technology here in America that can handle everything these regulators are talking about, tokenization, DeFi, bridging traditional finance, you need serious partnerships. I'm talking BNY Mellon, BlackRock, Van Eck, all the heavy hitters. Who has those partnerships? Ripple does. Show me another blockchain company with that kind of firepower. I'll wait. There isn't one. Nobody else is operating at that level. So Ripple's sitting at the top of the food chain here in the US, and the US is clearly moving toward blockchain infrastructure. I mean, come on, isn't it kind of obvious at this point?
Addresses a specific market need. The posture of public institutions, including the Federal Reserve, should be to acknowledge and embrace private sector innovation that can improve the payment system while preserving its safety and stability, which are as essential to the new generation of innovators as they are to legacy institutions. Now let me pull back a moment and remind everyone how we got here. Since nearly its founding, the Federal Reserve System has worked to facilitate payment and settlement system efficiency alongside the private sector. From the beginning, the clearing services provided by the reserve banks obviated the need for daily movements of cash in armored cars with heavily armed guards. Long before we started speaking of the payment rails that are facilitating the kind of innovation we'll be discussing today, the Fed was running trains on steel rails to deliver and clear paper checks traveling across the country. FedWire began conducting interbank transfers through telegraph wires in the early 20th century. Fast forward today, where we have multiple infrastructures that settle interbank transfers in real time. Today's conference will focus on private sector-driven innovation. We have assembled 100 private sector innovators who are leveraging cutting-edge technology to create new possibilities in the payments landscape. Our panelists are engaging in integrating traditional financial payment rails with distributed ledgers, developing new products and services in the digital asset ecosystem, and leveraging AI in the payment system. It's worth noting that the firms engaged in these activities include banks, asset managers, retail payment firms, technology companies, as well as crypto-native fintechs. This is an acknowledgement that distributed ledgers and crypto assets are no longer on the fringes, but are increasingly woven into the fabric of the payment and financial system.
Can we just take a second here? Because for years, people have been looking at us like we've got three heads. Oh, you're delusional. This crypto stuff is never going mainstream. Well, how's it feel now? The Fed just walked up to the microphone and said, hey, everyone, the future is distributed ledger technology. I mean, come on. You can't make this stuff up. And here's where it gets even better. Ripple isn't just sitting around talking about the future. They're building it right now. Real companies, real money, real use cases. This isn't theory anymore, people. Let me run through who's already on board, because this list is wild. G Treasury, check SBI in Japan, yup. Valor and Chipper are crushing it in Africa. You've got heavyweight names like DBS, Franklin Templeton jumping in. Oh, and by the way, BlackRock's involved through Securitize. BlackRock. Then there's VNAC, BBVA, pushing boundaries. And just when you think it can't get crazier, ABSA rolls up. This African banking powerhouse was something like $200 billion under their control just threw their hat in the ring. Folks, the train is leaving the station. Actually, scratch that. The train already left. We're just watching it pick up speed. All right, so XRP becomes the bridge asset connecting traditional finance with decentralized finance. Here's the thing. You need a bridge asset to make all this work. We're talking treasury management, collateral, cross-border payments, lending, liquidity management, all of that. And then over on the decentralized finance side, you've got stablecoins, reserve currencies, real-world assets, decentralized exchanges, lending protocols. Things are heating up. The Federal Reserve can integrate with Ripple. Regulatory bodies like the Federal Reserve will continue to set and enforce regulatory standards. Messaging standards like SWIFT can be easily integrated into Ripple as well. Oh man, and check this out. There was this clip from last year that totally nails what we've been talking about. The US Federal Reserve actually integrating XRP and Ripple into the system.
That is, people say, how can you trust, the Fed to do the bookkeeping? I mean, like I said, my response is, well, you don't expect the Fed to kind of steal your money. I mean, if the Fed can print all the money it wants, it's not going to mess around with your bookkeeping. So, we have this big spreadsheet, the blockchain if you want, but it's just managed by the Fed, and it's very cheap, much cheaper than Bitcoin. If you're willing to delegate the responsibility to a third party, but then the downsides to all of that, of course, is you'd actually suppose you didn't want the Fed to be responsible for processing the payments. I mean, suppose the Fed will likely impose some KYC restrictions on some purchases. They might not process some purchases that you might want to undertake, and so it was at that point that I said, well, we could, if we wanted to, extend the concept one step further. I'm not saying that this is ever going to happen, but just conceptually, you could imagine not FedWire for all, but kind of like a Fed coin, where what the Fed would do is actually just issue these, Bitcoin-like objects, but and they would enforce a par exchange rate with the U.S. dollar. That would eliminate the exchange rate volatility. But they could delegate the clearing of these payments to some third party, some sort of Ripple-like protocol, or possibly even Bitcoin. I mean, we could delegate the responsibility of processing these electronic, Fedcoin payments to the miners. And the idea there would be,
All right, so let me break this down for you. Ripple, XRP versus Bitcoin. Which one makes more sense for banks? Think about it. Bitcoin has zero banking infrastructure, no KYC, no compliance tools, no digital identity verification, nothing that banks actually need to operate. Now look at Ripple XRP. Everything's already built in, so seriously, what do you think they're going to pick? A cryptocurrency where nobody even knows who created it? Where the Satoshi wallet could wake up tomorrow and completely wreck the entire network? Where China or any major player could potentially grab 51% control and just run the show? Or are they going to go with a trusted American blockchain company that's already connected to 90% of the foreign exchange market? A company with global partnerships that's been building real banking infrastructure this whole time. Come on, you guys are smart. You can see what's happening here. They're basically telling us what's coming without spelling it out. All right, moving on. CEO BNY Mellon Treasury Services Businesses outlines the differences between tokenized deposits and stablecoins. Let's dive into this.
What are the benefits of tokenized deposits versus stablecoins? So that's the first part of the question. I'd say, what are the main differences? And then how do you see tokenized deposits being used for payments in a permissionless system, if possible?
Yeah, absolutely. So tokenized deposit, we think of that as cash in the bank, right? So it is a digital representation of a bank deposit. And so that stays at the bank. And so that stays within the walls of BNY as an example. And so the benefits of that are certainly cost efficiency, speed, but also liquidity optimization. Still one of the biggest problem statements that exists today in the payments industry is around optimizing your liquidity and reducing trapped cash and really reducing settlement risk. And so the tokenized deposits really help you do those things inside the wall of a bank. But then you have a stablecoin. So stablecoin think of that as cash outside the bank. It is backed by some form of collateral, cash, T-bills, what have you, but that can traverse across multiple chains and multiple systems. So we would see that existing alongside other forms of fiat and other forms of existing currency today. So there's a number of use cases. I think both are equally important, but they do different things.
Wait, what does Ripple solve? Exactly that, getting rid of Nostro Vostro. They've been saying this for years now. They can replace the SWIFT system, free up all that trapped cash, and actually let banks use their liquidity instead of having it just sitting there doing nothing. That's literally what Ripple has been building this entire time. Now, I also want to show you this. So what does Ripple and XRP have to do with tokenization deposits? Let me give you a bit more context on this. Ripple and XRP are closely linked to institutional movement towards tokenized deposits through their ongoing development of financial infrastructure, especially with the XRP Ledger and RLUST stablecoin. Ripple's XRP Ledger is purpose-built for tokenization, allowing institutions to issue, transfer, and manage real-world assets, including tokenized deposits on-chain, providing instant settlement, lower costs, and enhanced compliance. This is why Ripple is seen as a major enabler in the tokenization of deposits on the broader adoption of blockchain and regulated finance. All right, so Crypto Eerie wanted to highlight some really interesting updates happening with Ripple and XRP right now. Let's dive straight into what she had to say. SPAC deal key points at closing. Evernorth is expected to manage the largest XRP balance sheet in the public market, likely worth billions of dollars in value. Ripple is taking a limited 9.9 stake to stay under the SEC ownership radar. The big picture Armada 2 is merging with Pathfinder Digital Assets LLC, a new entity backed by Ripple and Evernorth, to create a freshly formed Delaware entity seated with XRP and cash contributions as the public entity. The ticker will be XRP on NASDAQ. It's initially being funded by investment commitments from Ripple, SBI Holdings, Chris Larsen, Pantera, Kraken, and others. It's structured as a tax-efficient SPAC deal with closing eyed for the first quarter of 2026, pending approvals. If additional investors are allowed in before closing, as the 8K permits via further pipe raises, the S3 will reflect the expanded total, including more names and a higher share count. So here's the thing. Other companies and institutions can actually jump on board with this. And from what I'm hearing, we're talking about potential growth into the multiple billions range here. Now, here's where it gets even better for XRP bulls. If the XRP price goes up before this thing closes, subscribers actually get bonus shares, turning volatility into free equity. Should the price drop, there's no downside clawback. International expansion in Japan, South Korea are identified as key targets with 18 and 26 of global trading volume, respectively. So let's talk about who's actually running the show here and who's responsible for all of this. We covered this in depth just yesterday, so some of you might remember. Now, Ripple, and this is important, Smoke pointed out that Ripple actually sits on the Federal Reserve Faster Payments Task Force. I should have mentioned this earlier, my bad. I switched up the video structure at the last minute, so sorry about that. All right, now check out these Evernorth connections. Think of this like a family tree, but for how all these companies and institutions are linked together. If you've been wondering how everything fits together, this is a perfect visual. Actually, you know what? Let me start with this instead, because they really nailed it with how they laid all of this out. So you've got all the players laid out here: Ripple, Evernorth Institutional, the investors backing this, how they're pushing the XRP ecosystem forward. I mean, there's just a mountain of good stuff in here, and more keeps pouring out every day. Look, if you want me to go deeper on Evernorth specifically, just shout it out in the comments. Tell me, yeah, break down Evernorth more, and I'm on it. I held back a bit since we already spent a good chunk of time on this yesterday. But listen, what's happening right now is genuinely wild. Put the pieces together, dig into this yourself, figure out where this train is headed, make your game plan, and then strap in because we're about to blast off. Man, I'm fired up. The good news just keeps rolling in. Catch you in the next one. Peace out. Oh, and real quick, none of this is financial advice. We're just talking shop here for fun. I'm not a financial advisor, so if you need actual advice, go find a pro.